Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Dr. James Lyons-Weiler coming to you live from the WWDNYK studios, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania tonight. Dr. James Lyons-Weiler, that's me, and Bernadette Pajer will be taking on the Oregon Medical Board with respect to the spurious, false, inflammatory, and defamatory claims that they've made against my colleague, my research colleague, Dr. Paul Thomas, MD, who is arguably the state's most talented pediatrician. The data show it, the patients know it. You wait till you hear how ridiculous the medical board's claims have been. And if you don't know the full story, after Dr. Paul and I published our thorough analysis, very carefully conducted analysis of 10.5 years of data on health outcomes from his practice, which was requested by the medical board, by the way. They wanted the data, and we published it. 5 days later, they suspended Dr. Paul's license. This is clear retaliation, and it will not stand. We're not going to appeal to the board. We're taking it to the public square, the public forum. In an open society, it only remains open as long as the people living in that society act accordingly. And thereby, I'm bringing this argument to the public in this first of a series of Unbreaking Science episodes in defense of Paul Thomas. And to help me with that tonight is the illustrious and super intelligent, my friend, Bernadette Pajer. How are you, my dear?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's great to see you, and I'm proud and honored to do what I can to support Dr. Paul. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So first, I'm going to give everybody some information about this letter to read ICWA. ICWA, of course, being Informed Choice Washington. Open letter. I've made a link, bit.ly/ICWA letter 2021. I'll flash that a couple of times tonight during our discussion. The person that's gracing our screen tonight goes by Bernadette Pajer, Supermom, Informed Choice Washington, President, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we are going to get underway with, well, first let's discuss, the public had a certain reaction to one of the most robust and rigorous vaxxed-unvaxxed studies ever conducted. There are other ones which we cited. What was your reaction to, the Paul Thomas, James Lyons-Weiler vaxxed-unvaxxed study?
It was just a big sigh of sort of relief and mixed with jubilation, because at last we had what we for so long wanted, and that the CDC has steadfastly refused to give, a comparison between fully unvaccinated children and vaccinated children, to see really what generations of parents have been witnessing and shouting about, and the CDC's refused to do it. So it was so exciting to see the data, and also to know that it came about because of the people. This was a grassroots effort that IPAC took on the study, and it was funded by people emailing each other and saying, hey, there's a study, can you help fund it? And it was $10 here, $20 there, whatever anybody could give in order to bring this very important information to the world.
Yeah, so if you're unfamiliar with this study, I was kind of surprised to find out of we don't have to have very complex statistics to know if you have 561 unvaccinated kids over 10 years and 2,400 who are vaccinated, and there's no ADHD, not a single case of ADHD in the 561 unvaccinated kids, that there's something very special about this pediatric practice. That's what it told me, as I'm looking at the data. There was just such a strong signal for so many of the things that people had talked about for years that they suspected. And, when I first came into vaccine risk awareness, as I call it, it was I was brought in kind of kicking and screaming. I started asking questions about vaccines. All of a sudden, I was attacked by this cadre of people who, in any other topic in science, they never would have behaved that way. And I
Hmm.
was like, where do you get the license to attack somebody? And it came up with phrases like science is for asking questions. And, one of the comments that I remember back early on, I think it was 2014, 2015, was science is for asking questions. What do they have a school where they teach you these phrases, you anti-vaxxers? And I said, yeah, it's called SUNY Oswego, Ohio State University, the University of Connecticut, the University of Nevada, Reno, Penn State University, and then I turned around and taught it at University of Massachusetts and and Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh. Yes, we call them universities and colleges.
Right,
This
right.
is where we learn that science is for asking questions. And it's
Yeah,
really, it's really amusing but sad that
sad.
this
Yeah.
cadre of people think that they can manipulate and control your perception with coercion, with bullying, and with all this other stuff. I wasn't going to have
Well,
it for a day in my life.
yeah, it can be a real wake up when you're earnestly talking curiosity and looking at the data, looking at the science and wanting to ask questions and getting shot down and it doesn't make sense. That is an awakening moment for a lot of people. I want to point out, Jack, um, two things, and I'm going to give an example here. So we have not just the pharmaceutical industry with their deep pockets capturing the media, putting out information everywhere. So we've got their influence. The real damage, what I call public health enemy number one, is public health agencies, because way back when they decided that their favorite tool against infectious disease was going to be the vaccine to the exclusion of all else, basically, they decided, and Andy Wakefield's 1986, the Act covers the origins of this and the history of it really well, that they would cover up any issues critical of vaccines. And so we have 60, 70 years of our government working with the industry to cover it up. And it's become bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a bigger and bigger lie to cover up. But um, I hate to use words like brainwashing and propaganda, but the messaging that vaccines are safe and effective and necessary is so systemic and deep in society and all that we are taught. I'll give you an example of what we saw. Like a couple of years ago, we had a titer bill for pets. And it was just to say that you could get your dog's titers checked for rabies before you got a booster. And we brought it into a senator, and the senator read that and said, "Oh, my wife loves her dogs. She's going to love this bill. She's really concerned that this dog's getting too many vaccines, and she's going to love this. Thank you, guys." So we got all done with that, and then we slid in front of him a titer bill for human babies that just said that you could, and it's something that already exists in Washington, that you can turn in a titer test in lieu of
Sure,
vaccination, but
sure.
most parents don't know it. So it was simply a notification bill that would that would require the public health department or any doctor administering a vaccine to notify the parent. Did you know you could get your child's titers tested to see if they really need this booster? That's all it was, information. And this senator, who was so eager and happy for the tighter pet bill,
Yeah.
his eyes glazed over, he went rigid, and suddenly, oh, yeah, well, I got another appointment here. I really don't have time to look at this one. I'll set it aside later. Yeah, I'll get back to you. That is how deeply ingrained and fearful people have been made to discuss anything critical this wasn't even critical of vaccines. This was just deviating from the faithful path. He thought it was deviating in a way that would get him in political trouble,
Well, I
and
have a
he
story that'll
ran.
match. I have a story that will match that. After reading 2,000 studies to write my book, The Environmental and Genetic Causes of Autism, I approached Dr. Richard Fry, MD, PhD. He was at the University of Arkansas at the time. And because his studies were the most objective and the most diverse kinds of studies on autism. And I asked him, would you please write the foreword to the book? Now, in the foreword of the book, he never mentions aluminum. he writes, he was very excited about it. He said, wow, this is really comprehensive. This is an amazing resource. Thank you very much for doing it, pulling this all together. And he never mentioned aluminum one time. A year later, he wrote an amazing review on the potential role of aluminum in autism. I'd like to think that maybe I had a little bit to do with that, but the important point here is after he read it and he said, this is amazing, it's incredible, you're going to change the world with this book, I said, okay, Richard, all the neurobiologists, all the neurologists, everyone that's involved in the health of the brain, that pediatric neurology, uh, we need to get a copy of this book to all of them so that they can know. And he said, James, they already know. They're not allowed to talk about it.
Wow. That is like, I mean, it kind of knocks you over, right?
Yeah, it certainly did.
that,
It took, I
that
just
they,
had spent 4 months slaving 16 hours a day, feeling like I
Mhm,
was uncovering this mountain of evidence that was buried, right? And I thought,
and
wow,
then
when people read this, they're going to go, wow, whoa, there is a plausible
mhm,
argument here. There
mhm,
is a plausible mechanism by
right,
which neurological disorders
right,
can come about through vaccines. What the heck?
right.
I'll put the book together, put it out there. And I feel so naive. I felt like one of those kids that ran
Yeah,
into the play class at the fair, like I didn't know it was
yeah.
there. So anyway,
Exactly. But what we've got here, and this is what I always say, like on my radio show, we need a revolution. We need a complete change in the entire global approach to communicable infection, because the model is so. I apologize for the phone. Hopefully, it's in another room, but you can
that's
probably still
okay.
hear it ringing. Um, what we have learned about the human immune system. Um, does not anymore fit with the interruption of uh, simply symptom suppression, which is what vaccines do, is symptom suppression, because we can see what happens there. And we need really this whole other approach that embraces the fact that we are microbial beings, that illness is part of the maturation journey of our immune systems. And then yes, sometimes that can get out of control and people need extra therapy and extra help to make sure that they don't have a severe disease and they get over it. But it's like going from fossil fuels to solar power or something. There's so much money invested in the old way of doing things. They are not going to allow the
Yeah,
natural
yeah, yeah,
progression to the next stage of.
yeah. We know all that. The point, so we know all that. So some vaccines suppress symptoms, right? And other vaccines
Yeah,
will induce. None of them prevent infection, but I think there's some arguable points there about the type of vaccine and so on. I mean, it's really clear that
right.
HPV vaccine does clear out the vaccine targeted types from the cervical from the cervix in vaccinated people, but then it just opens it up for type replacement. And
Right.
there's absolutely a diversity of types of vaccines out there. It's complex. There's different kinds, and they have different
Yes.
effects on it. And so you bring up a need for reform. You called it revolution. I call it Plan B. Here it is, folks. Go to
Yay.
jameslyonsweiler.com and find my article linked through here. It's peer reviewed for public health infrastructure and operations oversight reform in America. I'm not kidding around. We need to completely change public health so then medicine can go back to being medicine. Public health has
Hmm.
infiltrated and has taken over medicine in a very, very draconian, overarching manner. That
Hmm.
they don't have the right to claim the things that they've claimed about vaccines. And so,
Hmm.
you are not a bad person if you have vaccine skepticism. You're closer to being a scientist than, sticking your head in the sand or running and hiding in the dark. And this is every chance that I get. All my colleagues in academia, all the people in healthcare, everybody who has any concerns about vaccines or any knowledge about vaccine problems, and you're hiding it to save your own career, it's time for you to step up. 2021 is the time for all the scientists and healthcare workers to come out. And that's what Paul did. Paul came out and he said, you know what? I can't help what I'm going to find in my data. I can't help that they're going to find that my kids are so much healthier if they're unvaccinated. All he did was respect informed consent. So let's get to your letter if you don't mind. So here's
Yes.
the title at your website, there's an announcement of the letter. The title itself is Open Letter to the Oregon Medical Board, Apologize and Reinstate Dr. Paul Thomas's medical license. So let's talk about this apology. What form of the apology do you think would be acceptable to you? What do you think Paul Thomas deserves? He's got a huge practice, first of all, 10,000
Mhm.
patients. Over 10 years, it was 15,000. What kind of a apology would be suitable to make up for the damage that they've done to Paul's reputation with the spurious charges we're going to talk about tonight?
Well, I would say it'd be twofold. Initially, it would be a formal, very public apology to him and ensures it gets spread to each and every one of his patients affected. But it has to be public because he's beloved the world over, and
Yeah.
everybody needs to hear this. And what they can do then is put action to show the sincerity, and that would be to take that deep, hard look that I asked them to take and consider what it is they're doing as a board and to completely reform their goals and help the state of Oregon, help the entire United States change how they measure the competency of a practitioner
Yeah,
based
let's get to
on the
that. Let's
health
get to
of
that.
their
But I want to
patients.
stay on the
Yeah,
apology for a minute because I'm imagining like a press
yeah,
conference. I'm imagining where they
mhm,
show their face in public. I'm imagining that the bar has to be pretty high. They have
yeah,
taken this man's career, which is an illustrious and productive career of many years of learning how to
mhm,
optimize and work in a state that requires informed consent for vaccination. It requires respect for choice under the law, and
yes,
he's found out how to do that. And the medical board is acting like some Sharia organization coming in thinking that
mhm,
medical law trumps state law. That's a big
mhm,
problem. So I think that they should have to show their face in public. I think they should each get a microphone seated at a table, and they should one at a time retract verbally all of the spurious allegations they made about Paul and say into the camera that they sincerely apologize and that they will never do this kind of thing to all the other pediatricians in Oregon that have to respect choice.
right,
You see, it's not just
yeah,
Paul. The Oregon state law mandates that physicians provide true informed consent.
yeah,
And that's what this Sharia law like organization of the medical board is thinking that they could just make an example of Paul
mhm,
Thomas. So I'm going to tell you right now,
mhm,
when you see this, Oregon medical board members, it's not going to work. You have touched the third rail. We are going to meet you point for point, blow by blow. We are not going to back down. And it's
mhm,
you or Paul. That's my message to you. It's you or
yeah,
Paul. You or
mhm.
Dr. Thomas. So you're not going to stop. You have no idea what we have coming. It's all legal, it's all peaceful, it's all academic. We've got the science, you've got heresy. You're preaching
Exactly.
heresy about the immune system and so on. So we're going to get into that.
Yes,
But thank you for
yes.
letting me rant like that. I'm trying to rally people here.
It's your show.
Okay. So you ask these questions. What's the context of these questions? Is symptom avoidance through vaccine exposure leading to healthier children? And does exposure to the ingredients and vaccine products on the CDC's pediatric schedule lead to healthier children? Whose questions are these in your letter?
Those are those are my questions
Okay.
to the Board of Health. Yeah, because they had asked the question, are your non-vaccinated children unhealthy? And I turned it around and just said, you know, that.
Okay. No, that's
So,
fine. That's fine. So that's right. So the board actually asked for data from the practice to show that the unvaccinated kids were not less healthy than the vaccinated. And
mhm,
so, right, if that was true, if they were less healthy, then they might have a valid complaint about him respecting choice. But it
mhm.
turns out, given our study, that there's a bit of a different story here that they really didn't want to see. I mean, this
Yeah.
figure now is
Well,
famous. This figure now is
yeah.
famous, and I want to take a moment here to clarify that this is unadjusted. These results, as impressive as they are unadjusted. And to truly understand this study, you have to read the entire study. You can't just look at this and say, wow, look at the big difference, although that makes a big psychological impression. There are some of these associations and these differences. What we're looking at here is the days of life on each of these health outcomes and the relative incidence of office visits cumulative for each condition. And so when one of these, on the orange line, it looks gold here, but on the orange line, if it's increasing relative to the blue line, it means that there's far more office visits related to a kid being sick due to asthma, due to anemia, due to allergic rhinitis, due to all of these conditions, ADHD. And the blue line specifically is adjusted for the group size differences, so it's a valid comparison. But later on in the study, we actually adjust for things like the age of the patient. We match for the amount of time that they've been in the practice. So I'm not going to spend too
Hmm.
much time on the study. People have heard me talk about it. There's other places we've talked about it. But this is what they're confronted with. They're confronted with the answer, yeah, the
Yeah.
unvaccinated kids are definitely not less healthy than the vaccinated. So
Right.
we've answered that
And
question.
yeah, and there's a really key point that I want to make that's in the letter just before that. Because here, I mean, everywhere we go, we hear public health and other officials saying that we want our kids to be healthy, therefore they have to be vaccinated. If you get vaccinated, it keeps you healthy. So I made what I think is a very important point, and I've been trying to say this for a couple of years now. There's nothing in a vaccine that is needed for health. It's not vitamins, it's not nutrients, it's nothing to make you, smarter, anything. All it does is when it's working as intended, help your body perhaps resist an infection if you're exposed to a targeted microbe. That's it. Exposure to these products only has to do with the targeted infection. They have nothing to do with any other aspect of health, except for perhaps how they might be negatively impacting your health. We could talk about live vaccines and how sometimes there might be some crossover protection, and we can't get into the weeds here now. I think with that,
That's all
but I want
speculative, though. Even if we did get
right,
into the weeds and spend half an hour, it's all speculative. It's all observational. Hey, maybe there's cross protection. So that's not
right,
the level of evidence that's required to say, yeah, you should take every vaccine on the
yeah.
market because maybe it'll protect you against something else. That's speculative baloney.
Yeah, but V is not for vitamin. It's nothing that the body actually needs,
V,
right?
V is not for vaccine, you mean? V is for vitamin. V stands for vitamin.
Well, V should stand for vitamins,
Right.
um, nature first, drugs last, kind of a thing. So I just want people to keep that in mind because a lot of people like they don't understand how possibly getting something to protect you from whooping cough could possibly give you asthma. That doesn't make sense to them because they've never really
Well,
thought about
they don't know that
the
aluminum
triggering.
hydroxide is used all the time to induce asthma in
Mhm.
animals. So, but I
Yeah.
want to stay. I want to stay on what they did and what our
Okay.
response is to.
Okay.
So, they should have looked at Paul's practice in terms of the health of the patients. That was their question. But they used a different measure, right? And you nailed it in your letter. You brought up this point right here. You said, and I've interpreted it, you have measured a physician's competence based on the number of pharmaceutical products he prescribes rather than the health of his patients. So what are you talking about there?
Yeah, well, they were bringing up charges that he had a lot of children who were partially vaccinated or not vaccinated at all, and he didn't have enough letters from parents saying that they declined the vaccines. It was all about product
They don't
uptake
know
and
what he
records
has.
of
They're
product
guessing. They don't
denial
know
of
what Paul
sale.
has. In terms of letters of people declining vaccines, they have no idea what he has.
Yeah, they were so
Do,
product focused. There was not one word about the health of the patients except for like particular things that they pulled out to try to so ridiculously twist something to make it look like he did something wrong. And they were so absurd. He's such a good doctor that it was just
Well, in fact, and in reality,
impossible.
they pulled his license before the hearing, so they can't possibly be basing it on their assessment of the evidence about how many letters, because
But
he never had a chance to present the number of forms that he has
no,
filled out. So the
no.
point is that they reacted to the study. And in reacting to the
Yeah.
study, they're looking at the fact that he's not delivering enough vaccines. That's plain and simple, in the plainest and simplest terms. Instead of looking at the health outcomes of the patients, looking at the study and
Hmm.
going, oh, I guess we were wrong. Thank you, Dr. Paul. Not only did you do us the favor of producing the data, you saved us from reviewing it because you put it through thorough peer review. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you, Dr. Paul. Have a nice day.
Yeah.
And by the way, can
Yeah.
my kid jump into your practice, please? I mean, that's
Yeah.
what they should have done, right? Instead, they crapped their pants and they overreacted. And in doing so, they did something else as well, which is you called me up and you said, I need a quote for my article. What do you think about the Oregon Medical Board's
Hmm.
reaction? And I said, the Oregon Medical Board has not only declared war on actual ethical medical practice, in my view, they have declared war on objective science. So they've not only touched one
Exactly.
third rail, they've touched a second third rail because I've committed my life to returning objective science to medicine. My
Hmm.
entire life's goal is to make sure that we have reality based public health, reality based medicine, and I'm
Hmm.
fully engaged with this. Absolutely.
You
So,
are. And,
yeah.
you've even gotten in trouble with the vaccine risk community, especially in those early days when you joined us before people really knew and understood you, because you were so objective that they felt like that maybe, you were really pushing for pharma, pushing, in a way that people didn't understand. And I
Mhm.
really respect you for that. Because for a while there, you were getting a ton of flack from both sides. And you must have thought, what the heck have I gotten into? I'm like being squeezed out of a tube of toothpaste here. I can't.
It's funny you say that because yesterday I had a conversation with my younger son. He was pretty upset about the things that were going down in Washington. I'm not going to discuss his political leanings, but the point being, I said that in the vaccine risk community, I feel like I have reminded 20,000, 25,000 people, I'm guessing somewhere on that scale of people, that what CDC is doing is not science. So don't be mad at science. It's not science, it's science like activities, right? If they
Mhm.
were actually doing science, we'd have a much healthier population. If we were actually doing science, we'd have safer vaccines. And for those of you that know and love me, and we can disagree on the point whether or not anyone could ever create a safe vaccine, right? We don't have to debate that tonight. The point is, I think that we could make them safer. That I've outlined a program on how to do that. And if I save vaccines and all the anti-vaxxers grow to hate me because I saved vaccines and pharma makes it through this intact, and people can use vaccines if they want to, but they still have
Yeah,
choice. I'm still going to love
yeah,
you. There's no problem there. Go ahead. I'm going
yeah.
to fight every day of my life for medical in science to become again science based and for your right to choose and we have laws on the books already that protect them. So let's look at the next quote that I pulled out here and have you comment on it. You wrote, if your goal, meaning the Oregon Medical Board, is to vaccinate 100% of Oregon's children according to full and ever-growing CDC schedule, then your goal is to treat any child incapable of tolerating that schedule as acceptable collaborative damage, unworthy of protection. Boy, that's a good turnaround. I gotta say. They're saying Dr. Paul's not protecting kids, and you're like, no, some kids can't tolerate the vaccines. You guys are the ones that are putting kids at risk
Mhm.
if you
Mhm.
succeed at your goal to vaccinate everything that has two legs.
Exactly. And that is the essence of what's wrong with public health. The messages come top down, and they're supposed to be set at the population level. No doctor is supposed to take a population level guideline or policy or recommendation and apply it to each and every one of his patients. That is malpractice. And Dr. Paul does not, commit malpractice. He treats every child individually and respects medical freedom and the right to choose. It's as simple as that.
So
And
their ethics are stuck in the 80s. Their data analysis are stuck in the 80s. Their understanding of individualized medicine stuck in the 80s. I mean, they've
right,
literally just held on to what they thought in 1986.
right.
And no, every child it should get every vaccine, right? I mean,
And
there's no
right.
such thing
Well,
as seizure from vaccines that people have, right?
the top pro-vaccine researchers who are just fanatical about research and science, who kind of see us as lab rats, right? All you have to do is look at what they're saying. Oh yeah, the Somalis probably should only have a half dose of the MMR. That's our Dr. Gregory Poland, right?
That's
You
right.
know, if you read, actually just go read the researchers, especially when they're working on a new vaccine. I wish the Oregon Medical Board would go read about the development of the new pertussis vaccines they're trying to create, because in that development, they justify all the money they're spending on a new one by pointing out all the factual errors, the things wrong with the old one. So
Yeah, you're talking
that's where
about
you get the truth.
James
Yeah,
Cherry, MD's,
yeah,
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 failed vaccine and epidemic pertussis in in the era of a failed vaccine. Right, absolutely. So
right.
pertussis vaccines do not prevent transmission. We know that from the baboon study. We know it from human studies. You know, it's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they act as though they can false advertise and say that grandma is going to be a threat to the baby if she doesn't get the pertussis vaccine, which could make her an asymptomatic carrier. We've been over this. Everybody knows this now.
Right.
It's been around for years now that we know this,
And
and yet where's the change in the policy? Where's the change in the
what I
vaccine schedule, ASIP? This is
right.
ridiculous.
And what I'm really hoping, Jack, is that the COVID-19 vaccines will prevent. We've got a really narrow window here right now. I've heard from nurses who work like in ICUs and in the, you know, the maternity wards. They're being told that when their time comes, they're going to have to get the COVID-19 vaccine so they don't endanger the babies. Of course, these investigational vaccines have never been proven not to stop transmission. This is unknown. They already make these nurses and doctors get whooping cough vaccines, even though it's well known, but they ignore it. They don't. They use the same. They say otherwise you might give the pertussis to the baby, and that is just such a false lie.
Once every
But they
10
won't listen
years.
to any. Right? Oh no, they're yeah. Well, maybe
That's
it's.
the
I think it's
recommendation. Once every 10 years.
yeah. Well, and for women they're giving
Unless
it
they
more,
unless they
but
scratch they
yeah.
get a scratch on their skin, then they get a tetanus, and
Oh no,
acellular pertussis is
they're
in there.
they're giving it more often now because of the pertussis failure. It only lasts like 18 months
That
at the
makes no
most. So they're
sense.
giving it
That
more.
makes no sense.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
And so anyway, so what I'm concerned with, and then we got to get back to Dr. Paul here, is that we have this unique opportunity because it is an investigational vaccine with only like 3 months of data that the nurses and the doctors can push back and say, we don't know that. And I'm really hoping they say, by the way, it's not true for pertussis, you know.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that they're using the same language to market COVID-19 vaccines. There, a letter just went out from University of Washington Hospital to people who are patients, and it just says the vaccines have been proven safe and effective. When your time comes, you need to get it. What?
Wait, yeah, I know, I've seen that. So this vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccines are given emergency use authorization. That is not FDA approval. FDA approval is a
No,
completely different process, okay? And
right.
second, your point about whether healthcare workers, medical physicians, nurses, and so on are going to stand up. Oh, yeah. I have 4 invitations from 4 different major medical institutions to give webinars on pathogenic priming and antibody disease enhancement to break down for them exactly what it might happen to them and how they should communicate to their employers. Hey, wait a minute, we need more information. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they came to me. This is incredible. I mean, this is a 180-degree turnaround where, like, I was a pariah.
Yeah,
Now it's like, hey, wait a minute, James Lyons-Weiler knows something about that. Let's give him a call. And I appreciate that. And I respect where they're at. They're
yeah.
scared. They're afraid. They don't want to get more serious COVID. They don't want to become a long hauler. They really don't know. So back to the medical board. You used a
Yes.
phrase that I thought was a brilliant phrase. You used this phrase right here, manufactured charges. So that's what we're going to get into, that the board
Okay.
manufactured a few charges. The first one that we want to talk about is what you brought up earlier, titers. You wrote
Mm-hmm.
that the Oregon Medical Board um,
That's a quote from their.
wrote this. They wrote, the
Mhm.
Oregon Medical Board wrote, except for rare cases of suspected immune deficiency, there is no clinical indication for assessment of antibody titers. The ordering of unnecessary testing is a violation of ORS. There's the number. Unprofessional or dishonorable conduct as defined in ORS, and there's the number. Willful and repeated ordering or performance of unnecessary laboratory tests. However, Bernadette points out She writes, "We agree, the board and she, that unnecessary medical procedures are universally considered a breach of medical ethics, in part because no medical procedure is without risk. But you have it all backwards. It is far safer to do a titer check on a child than to subject a child to the risk of a second dose, and it should say second unnecessary dose of MMR.
Mm.
Oregon accepts antibody titers in lieu of receipt of a second MMR. Hawley's Law in New Jersey, named after Hawley Stavola, who died from a severe adverse reaction to the second dose of MMR, requires parents to be informed about the titer test option. Administering a pharmaceutical product that is not medically indicated is unprofessional or dishonorable conduct. Titer testing, rather than exposing a child to a dose that is not medically indicated, is doing one's medical due diligence. Isn't the
Mhm.
board guilty of what they're accusing Paul of by trying to mandate second doses of MMR to patients who don't need it?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that second dose, which, if they knew anything about vaccines, they would know, was not brought on because it was needed for everybody, but to catch that like 5 to 10% of children who did not respond to the first dose to see if they could catch them up. And a few will respond to the second dose, but there is always remaining a certain percentage who never respond with antibody titers to MMR.
In your letter, you also point out that the Oregon Medical Board apparently needs, you don't say this is me being a smartass, they apparently need to talk to some dictionary author like Webster or one of them because they don't know what recommended means. They have no idea what ACIP
Yeah.
recommended vaccination is, right?
Yeah.
And so Paul is trying to not administer unnecessary medical procedures. Hello, I
Right.
mean
Yeah.
they can't get away with this. They are guilty of what they're charging Paul with. And if they succeed, they should lose their medical licenses. They should be stripped of their
Hmm.
position of the board because they are mandating by Sharia like medical law unnecessary vaccinations on patients who don't need it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. If the board works the way it does here in Washington State, that would mean that the governor hand selects that board. I don't know if that's true there. The concerns would be if it is their governor is not likely to replace any of those people with anybody better informed.
Oh well, no, we have better ideas on how medical law
Yeah.
should be administered. By the way, people,
Yeah.
I want to take a moment here and I want to clarify a thing. I'm making an analogy between the medical law in Oregon and the serious question is who is the legitimate authority on the law of the land in Oregon? Is it the medical profession or is it the elected legislators? And I'm using the example of Sharia law not because I'm against Muslims or I don't think Islam is a fine religion. I'm using it because it's the closest analogy that I can think of. It's the most recent thing that we know of these days as a potential presumptive threat. And I've often called, I often, within Islam, you have good actors and bad actors, just like everyone else. I want to say that. Second, I could be choosing a Christian theology or theocracy. Yes, I don't want a theocracy at all. I don't want a Jewish theocracy. That's the whole point. So look at it this way. I'm using this example not because I'm not politically correct. I'm using this example because it's the first one that came to mind. And so if that shows as a bias in me, I'm willing to examine that, and I apologize if anybody's offended. I certainly don't mean to offend anyone. So let's make sure that we understand that when I say it's a Sharia law like medical law, I'm contrasting the medical law authority that they believe that they have because they presume that they have more authority than the Oregon lay law. People of Oregon, they lay down their votes. You get the legislative process writes the laws go into effect, and the physicians must follow that law. The physicians
Hmm.
must not follow other laws that some arbitrary organization sought to impose upon the people of Oregon. And that's why we have
Hmm.
a representative government. And that's what you saw happen yesterday. People looking at this thing going, wait a minute, are we going to have a representative government or not? I'm not going to bring go very deeply into that issue, but let's stay focused here. The next thing I want to
Yeah.
show is backing away slowly, table 3A here that you put in here. I want to fade over here. What's this all about? You've got list of
Yeah.
75
Well,
outcomes identified for evaluation, and 47 bolded outcomes are initially considered plausible to study relative to childhood. What is this in your letter for?
in 2015, the CDC commissioned a paper to study a whole series of vaccine adverse events that had been reported over the years, and that I forget their new name, the IOM, but it's called something else now. But at the time, the IOM had said, we got no data. Nobody's doing any studies to see if these outcomes that are being reported are actually related to exposure to vaccines. We need answers. And that had been building and building. So the CDC commissioned a white paper to see if it was feasible to use the VSD data to study this. And they chose people enmeshed in the whole vaccine world who were really guaranteed to pretty much design studies that likely would not show any
They're
cause,
biased.
but
They're biased. They're biased, is what you're
biased.
saying.
However, these experts, which included Stanley Plotkin, did look at it and evaluate the list and narrowed it down to things they thought were plausible, biologically plausible outcomes to exposure to the entire schedule. That's the 47. The rest that they did not bold are outcomes that they felt were probably due to individual vaccine or an individual vaccination visit. So you'll see SIDS there is not bolded, implying that, a lot of times that's not reported as something when somebody's 15 and they have asthma and autism and all these other things. Usually SIDS happens after 2-month, 4-month, 6-month vaccination. So those weren't bolded. So they admitted these things are biologically plausible, and we've got no data to determine one way or the other. So the board needed to see that. They needed to see that even the CDC does not know whether or not these outcomes are related to vaccination. And Dr. Paul's study, in which we look at the fully non-vaccinated, the partially vaccinated, and just a few almost fully vaccinated, it certainly does seem to say, or does say, that yes, these outcomes, some of them were witnessed.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. You brought up SIDS. I want to point out that part of the reason why we can't really find an association between vaccines and SIDS is because they split the diagnostic into SIDS and one. If you're over 1 year old, they don't call it SIDS anymore. That has the effect of reducing the sample size and reducing the power, so you're not likely to find association. This kind of game in diagnosis, there's this diversification of names for things that reduces your statistical power. I mean, this is not inconsistent with the idea that perhaps they don't want to find, or they have a mandate to not find, which we know that they're told by the CDC. The IOM was originally told by Walter Orenstein to not find an association between vaccines and autism. So, all right. So the next thing that I pulled up was an example where, hey, guess what? There's a problem. Antiphospholipid syndrome. Tell us about this. What was your point about this one in your letter?
Well, because as I said earlier, the pertussis portion of the DTaP or the Tdap is very flawed. It doesn't prevent infection, colonization, or transmission. It just, for a short amount of time, at the most maybe 18 months, can reduce symptoms in somebody. And so they are now in many states up to 6 doses of DTaP, Tdap, by the time a child is in the 6th grade. And this isn't just pertussis, of course, it's diphtheria and tetanus. And these have a pretty high aluminum load, right? So you're getting exposed to a lot of aluminum as well every time you get this. Well, that study that you pulled up shows that there is, and you're the scientist, so I'll probably use the language wrong here. I don't know if it's association, whatever, but you can induce antiphospholipid syndrome in animals with tetanus vaccines. So they do know that there's this, and so now we are hyper-immunizing children to tetanus and potentially setting them up for this antiphospholipid syndrome, which happens to be one of the leading causes of infertility in the United States today. So for girls, they don't stop at sixth grade. So they're probably like, if you get a cut or something when you're in high school, they're going to give you another one. And then with each and every pregnancy, no matter how close those pregnancies are, they're telling you to get another one in pregnancy. And so how many people are losing, and they show a real clear uh, associate that or cause. I really need to learn that language of what it is, but
But
the
just say link.
antiphospholipid syndrome.
You have
Yeah,
link, and then
link.
you have association or
Yeah.
correlation, and then you have cause. And if it's not sorted, just say link. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, link between that, because it basically makes you not able to get the blood supply properly to the developing fetus, and so you're like in the mouse studies, they just reabsorb it ended in pregnancy loss. It's very sad. I think some women are overcoming it because they're knowing to test for it, and they can put them on some blood thinner drugs,
Yeah.
which is a little dangerous because you could potentially bleed dangerously when you're pregnant if you're
Oh,
taking
there's
these
always a
things.
medical solution to a vaccine problem if they have to admit
Yeah,
it, like anaphylaxis. Don't worry about anaphylaxis because we have EpiPen, so it's okay. That is negligence. That's negligence.
yeah,
We're going to give you this vaccine that may or may not prevent transmission. You're going to get some of you are going to get anaphylaxis, but don't worry. So now CDC changed it and said if you have anaphylaxis, specifically if you have PEG sensitivity, you probably shouldn't get the coronavirus. Let's move on to this data from the CDC, coronavirus vaccine, sorry. To this data from the CDC, the crude death rate for infectious diseases. What was your point? What were you trying to educate the board about with this particular graph?
I got to remember what led me into that. I don't know. Here, let's pull up and remember. I mean, there's so many things I could have been saying, but off the top of my head now, I'm forgetting. Um, I
You're
guess I was
talking
just
about you're talking about how just like tetanus before the targeted vaccines were introduced, the
oh,
rates of
yes.
severe outcomes and deaths due to childhood diseases, indeed all infectious diseases, had plummeted due to improved sanitation and living conditions in the U.S.
Right. So yeah, I think the point, and I would have loved to expand it, but it was already what, 7, 8 pages long. Maybe the point I would have loved to have made even further is that because public health adopted this tool, the vaccine, um, they have completely neglected treatment at all and any natural prevention. And so to show that the vaccine wasn't the hero that it gets the credit for, and that Dr. Paul, by not vaccinating the child in his clinic, that child is still at very low risk of a poor outcome to that infection. And surely there are many treatments that we know now in the year now 2021 that could help you safely navigate a child through any childhood illness. The fact that tetanus, who they were all freaking out about in their charges against him, there were before the vaccine only about 500 cases in the entire United States per the CDC. The same with measles and no, measles was that number was for death, but because tetanus can be very fatal. But then there's I think I linked in there as well just one example. It was a published study of several people who had very high antibody titers to tetanus through vaccination, and they got tetanus anyway. Because if you don't properly clean the wound, if you sutured up too quickly, unfortunately, is what these parents did. They didn't mean
So
to
let's
do it
let's
wrong,
back
but
up.
they.
We're transitioning into a particular point.
Oh,
So
okay,
before we get into
tetanus.
that,
Okay.
what I wanted to say is this graph made me think of, well, because thimerosal is still present in flu vaccines, and we
Mm-hmm.
know that it inhibits the protein ERAP1, and ERAP1 is necessary to properly fold your proteins in your immune system to function properly, then
Mm-hmm.
arguably vaccinating, and due to antigenic shifting and due to the viral competition, viral inhibition, all of these things, arguably vaccination could be confusing the heck out of our immune systems, and we could see a resurgence in measles, in mumps, in any number of the sepsis, because our immune systems can't really produce And now we have COVID-19, and some people do well and some people don't do well. Some people that don't do well, most of the people that don't do well appear to have Th2 skewed immune systems. Well, aluminum is a known cause of Th2 skew. Now, there could be
Hmm.
other causes, but aluminum is a known cause. We do it to animals to induce Th2 skew, and Th2 skew is a
Hmm.
predictor of poor outcome with COVID-19 infection because your immune system is jacked. And so this chart is an interesting one in the point. Listen, we were sick. We used to have high rates of death due to infectious illness, right? Relatively high. And that's come down to basically nothing. But the more and more and more you vaccinate, it arguably could go in the other direction. And so Paul's practice is a great example where they're not burdened by chronic illnesses. The kids that are not vaccinating or partially vaccinated, they don't have as much
Hmm.
asthma and so on. They don't have the pro-inflammatory condition in their lungs that would,
Yeah.
imbue other conditions.
I'm also very concerned with mercury, and then we'll get back to Dr. Paul here because, and I remember there was some discussion on it in some thing that they were taking questions at the CDC, I believe, where they decided to recommend tuna to pregnant women. Instead of, limited amounts, they would say, you can have it, but only so much. They should say no. No amount of mercury during pregnancy is
Swordfish and
safe for your
tuna is a
baby.
bad idea. Yeah, yeah.
But there's so many other things they could have recommended to them, but they were recommending this much tuna. And it should be no mercury at all. And surely that's to disguise the fact that, they're still injecting it in a certain amount if you're getting it from the multi-dose flu vaccine. But
Well, I think the
yeah.
problem is that people don't really understand when they say that the entire American population. They're speaking to the entire American population. And a swordfish in small amounts or tuna in small amounts might be okay for some percentage. They're guessing, right? But the
Mhm.
risk is low. Well, the risk is still 100% for some people. That's the
Mhm.
point. There are some people that can't
Right.
detoxify as well as others. Let's
But
be real
but
and
they were
let's have, where's the
right.
humanity? Where's the
Right.
compassion for the people that can't handle these toxins? And of course, then we have the low dose toxicity problem. I pointed out to Bruce Landfer, a great toxicologist, that he has low dose, he has a bimodal distribution of all kinds of toxins. The highest exposure is really, really making people sick. And then at the end, the lowest exposure is also making them sick. Those are the people that can't handle that low, it's not everybody, it's a smaller
Yeah.
distribution. You got the high distribution and the small. Those are the people that can't detoxify as well. We're not clones of each
Right.
other. We all have
Yeah.
problems with different toxins.
Yeah. I always refer to it as over responders and under responders. And
Okay.
it helps people, if you get some people, one aspirin, they got to go to bed. It's just an overdose, one aspirin. And other
Yeah.
people could, chug 12 tablets. It doesn't phase them. So there's over responders and under responders. Okay,
All right.
on with Dr. Paul.
So for the last thing, I wanted to ask you about patient D. You started talking about it, but basically in this
Oh, yes.
complaint about that they made to Paul, where they stripped his license, they suspended his license, they trumped up these charges against him as though he could some in logical way have changed the clinical course for some of these patients, when in fact and in reality, all you have to do is look at the details of the case and you can see that in no way could Paul have done anything better. So let's talk about
Mhm.
patient D. I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. So is this the tetanus one? I don't
Yeah.
have it in front of me. Um, yeah. So the way they wrote it up, they word crafted this thing. Somebody not familiar with the case, reading their description of this little boy who was, I think, kicked in the head by a horse, I think in a barn.
Some kind of wound,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, some kind of wound in a barn anyway. And the parents sutured up themselves, and the boy ended up with tetanus. He was
Well,
fully
wait, back
unvaccinated
up.
for
They sutured it
what?
themselves using cat gut.
Using cat guy.
Now, they used cat gut tendon in a wound that was acquired on a farm. Now, if you know anything about tetanus, I learned it from Dr. Russell Blaylock, MD. If you live in the city, you're probably not going to get tetanus because there's no large farm animals around. It's a bacterium that lives in ruminants and large farm animals in their gut. So there had to have been copious amounts of this waste around. It was a deep, deep laceration. And you're
Yeah.
only ever going to have a problem with tetanus if you basically get a gash that's like 3 inches deep. You're not going to get it from a
Yeah.
small scratch. So that's what Russell Blaylock
Right.
MD says. But go ahead. So he's got this deep laceration.
Yeah.
The parent sutured it up, and he got a bad
Yeah.
infection.
Bad infection. Went to he was in the hospital for a couple of months. You're putting me on the spot trying to remember exactly what the Board of Health told says. Do you have the
Okay, so I'll
little
just read it. Patient D,
snippet
now a
of it?
nine year
Read
old
it.
male, was completely non immunized. That's by parent choice. Required, you have to allow that under Oregon law, okay? Patient D sustained a D, and patient D was not in Paul's practice at the time
Oh,
of
see,
the.
we were going to spring that at the end. You're going to
Oh, I'm
read the
sorry, I gave
whole
away the
thing.
punchline. I'm sorry. So
Yes.
patient D sustained a large, deep scalp laceration at home in a farm setting on August 8, 2017. Was treated with colloidal silver and his parents suturing the wound independently. Okay. So he subsequently developed acute tetanus requiring intubation, tracheotomy, feeding tube placements, and an almost 2 months ICU stay at Dornbecker's Children's Hospital. That sounds horrible. So far, Paul
Hmm.
doesn't even know this family. Up to that point, Paul doesn't
Okay,
even.
you keep ruining it. Come, keep going.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, so patient D was then transferred to Legacy Rehabilitation. Licensee, meaning Paul Thomas, saw patient D for a follow-up clinic. For follow-up clinic, for follow-up in clinic. Oh, no, this isn't follow-up. November 17th. I bet you it was the first time he saw him. Licensee's notes documented a referral to a homeopath, recommended fish oil supplements, and phosphatidylserine. He did not document an informed consent discussion about the risk benefits of immunization for a child who had just sustained and was still had sequela of and remained vulnerable despite prior infection. Wait a minute. Prior infection to tetanus, it doesn't give you immunity to tetanus, a life-threatening and disabling disease that is preventable by
Yeah.
proper vaccination. He just had tetanus. That's an
He had
unnecessary
just
medical.
right.
Wait, okay,
Right.
so
And so if you didn't know the case and you had just heard this and it did go around the internet and somebody read it on a YouTube video and you didn't know any better because of the way they wordsmith that, you would think, oh my God, he was this child's doctor from the beginning. And this, his influence made these parents not get the child vaccinated, and he still didn't give the child the vaccine, and he didn't even dare record it in their medical records. It's just such a lie because the hospital, like you said, Dr. Paul had nothing to do with this little boy's case until the hospital said they would not release the child until an MD took over his care. And so the parents went shopping for a doctor who would say, I will be his doctor. And every one of them turned him down because they refused to get a tetanus vaccine. They refused. So they finally found Dr. Paul, who they said, we will not get a vaccine, but we need a doctor. And he medical ethics, he did his, what he's supposed to do. And he took this child into his care at that point to take over that care.
are you
That's
telling
where
me
he
that
entered.
wait, are you telling me that there are doctors in Oregon that will refuse this critically wounded 9-year-old male
Yes,
essential medical care simply because they won't take the fucking vaccine?
exactly. There you so
It's my show.
Jack, now we're
It's
gonna
my
get
show.
I,
It's my
I know,
show.
but we want to share this everywhere. You got to quit that.
I'm sorry, just warn them. Warn them. The
Okay,
point
we're
is, they were going to let this kid die potentially, not be in
right,
touch with a physician, and they turned him down because they wouldn't take
right,
the vaccine. I mean,
right, and
wait, I have a question. Who's
yes,
committing malpractice here?
all of
It's
those
not
doctors who
all
refused
those
to help
doctors
that
are.
child.
Exactly. That's my opinion. I think
Right,
that's the consensus opinion of any reasonable thinking individual.
right,
This is an outrage. This is an outrage that they spun this in such a way that they didn't turn around and say, you know what? Thank you, Paul. We do need a practice in
right.
Oregon for people that won't vaccinate. Those people need medical care too. Do these
Yes.
do these specific medical board members, are they so callous and have such callous disregard for human life and pain and
Hmm.
suffering that they would rather
Hmm.
have parents wandering around in Oregon not being able to find medical care if their kid needs it? Is that the future that
Right.
they want to build? That kids are going to die unnecessarily because they can't get medical care? I mean, this is
Yeah,
sick.
it's
I'm
absurd.
sorry that
Yeah,
I
it
I'm
is.
sorry that I
Yeah.
whipped out my f
Yeah.
bomb, but I hold
No,
that in reserve for this specific instance. I apologize, Bernadette, and all of Bernadette's
that,
family. I'm so sorry. It comes
oh,
from the
we're
heart,
not
believe
opposed to
me.
the word. It's just what if we want to share this on social media where children might be in earshot? Not that,
Children
a
shouldn't be
lot of our
listening.
champions.
Children should not be listening to this anyway. They really shouldn't.
Okay.
This is not
But
appropriate for them.
but I need to add then, and I included in the letter the fact that there are many, many published cases of people with very high antibody titers who have gotten tetanus because if the wound is not properly cleansed, it doesn't get air and it doesn't really bleed, then it does not, then the tetanus vaccine is useless. There are many, many cases of people who have very high antibody titers to due to vaccination in which they came down with tetanus. So it's very likely that even if this child had been vaccinated, because of the situation, probably overwhelming levels of tetanus in that wound that he had, because it was in a barn, it was sutured with catgut and all that stuff, it was probably, you know, there was some probably really deep embedded tetanus spores that had the perfect condition that no vaccine would overcome. And in fact, there's this study from cancer medicine. Sometimes you go sideways and you can learn some truths. So I was amazed about this study. I think it came from, brought to my attention by Dr. Tetiana Obukohanet. She's just brilliant immunologist. So these cancer doctors were looking for a vehicle to carry cancer treatments into the brain. And they knew that part of the tetanus that grows after the spores get in there, whatever that's called, are really good carriers because they travel on nerve endings to get into the brain. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm saying it right. Check the website. We've got a post on it just to make sure I have the details right. But they wanted to know, if we use this as a carrier to get cancer drugs into the brain, will somebody being vaccinated against tetanus, will this prevent it from getting into the brain? Lo and behold, it did not. It did not. And what does this potentially mean? It means that in the right condition, that little tetanus carrier carrying tetanus itself will get to the brain and cause disease.
Yeah.
They proved it, right? And so, it seems like and one of the things that Tetiana has pointed out so brilliantly is there may be one situation where the tetanus vaccine makes sense, and that's if you're giving birth in filthy conditions where they're going to use filthy instruments, and there's a chance that the instruments and the cutting of the cord may lead to the introduction of tetanus spores. And in that case, because it's blood flowing in that umbilical cord, that if there's antibodies in that umbilical cord, it could prevent tetanus. So that seems to be the one situation where it might prove to be a benefit. But there's another option, right, Jack? You make sure you have clean sanitary conditions, or you help different groups of people who are living in poverty have the right conditions to give birth in, so they're not being exposed
Well, it's
to.
really certainly is beyond the pale that the medical board chose this particular case. They seem opportunistic, they seem predatory, they seem desperate. For them to choose this case, which is so
Yeah.
obviously not a case where Paul can be held accountable for doing what the law requires him to do, which is to respect choice of the parents to not vaccinate. What's he going to do? Coerce them? Is he going to threaten them? Do you know, people, it's illegal under federal regulations to threaten or coerce anyone to enroll in any human subjects experiment. And the tetanus vaccine, Tdap and DTaP, all of them, acellular pertussis vaccines, they are under constant chronic, they call it pharmacovigilance, post-market surveillance studies. And these, in my view, these physicians should be consenting them. Everyone who, whenever they offer any vaccine, to a non-randomized human subjects experiment, because we really don't know
Well,
what it
yeah,
means to do tetanus vaccination on top of measles and mumps, on top of this and on top of that.
no.
We really have no idea what we're doing. And so, Paul's
Well,
a good guy. He's an ethical
yeah.
physician, and I'll stand up with him anytime to defend him.
Right. The law says that physicians must act as learned intermediaries. So even though very little by law is required to be handed over to the parent or the guardian of the young patient, the law says that that doctor must be educated by the pharmaceutical company on the full knowledge of that product he's about to give. And that doctor in this role is supposed to provide to each individual situation the information that would be needed to make sure that this child is uses this drug or whatever in the safest way possible based on that child's needs. And that is not happening. Um, Doctors are not honoring the learned intermediary. And, another reason why the 1986 Act has just got to go, because it's just not working.
They asked for that responsibility. The medical doctors wanted
Yes.
to be the learned intermediaries so that they too would not have to be liable. They didn't want the liability for vaccine injury to fall on them. So they negotiated that, and now they're abdicating their part of the deal. Just like HHS abdicates their part of the deal every time they deny a vaccine injury case in National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. In my view, the HHS should be going out and finding vaccine injury cases. They if they spent as much money defending, finding vaccine injury cases and being objective about it, and then giving that feedback to pharma. Look, this vaccine's costing us too much you need to reformulate it. Then we'd have a
Mm-hmm.
rational basis for a vaccine program, a beginning of one. This is what I mean by
Mm-hmm.
we need reform. This is what you mean when you say we need reform. We actually need to rethink this whole thing. This is a disaster upon disaster upon
Mm-hmm.
disaster. Think about what Peter Ube has found and his team. You know, higher rates of deaths from all causes in a vaccine naive population if they get the acellular pertussis vaccination, the DTP. And the remarkable thing is the medical board thought that they were going to get away with this. That's the remarkable
Yeah.
thing. That they actually thought that they were going to be able to pull this off and that Paul would just kowtow and go, "Oh, sorry, medical board, thank you. Thank you. I please beg, don't take my license. Don't take my license, please." He's not going to do
No.
that. The whole point is Paul is a man of character and he's a man that every American should get. If you knew Paul Thomas, your life would be better off. I guarantee you,
Yeah.
you want friends like Paul Thomas, you want neighbors like Paul Thomas, you want parents like Paul Thomas. Paul Thomas is the kind of American citizen that we need to behold
Mm-hmm.
and celebrate. He's 100% a good guy. I've never seen him
Amen.
do anything other than what's right. He's not manipulative. He's not conniving. He is 100%. He loves kids. He went into pediatrics because he loves kids. He's simply not going to bend. And therefore, it's them
Yeah.
or
He's got
us.
10 kids, doesn't he? Isn't he 10 children? He's got
Yeah,
a
and I'm going to
lot.
have Paul. I'm going to have Paul on. This is a series of
Yeah.
podcasts. We're going to have another person on who's writing another article. We're going to have some of Paul's patients on, and we're going to talk with Paul's
Good.
patients about what he's like as a doctor, and then we're going to talk to Paul, the man. We're going to listen to Paul. I'm going to ask him about the time of when he cut his teeth, learning medicine, what that was like. We're not going
Mm-hmm.
to talk about the board.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to get to know Paul. And this is our plan. And
Mm-hmm.
Bernadette, you've done a great thing by kicking this off with your urgent open letter to the Oregon Medical Board. What I would like people to do is I would like to ask you to make sure, especially if you are in the state of Oregon, to make sure that everybody that you know, every citizen, every parent, every teacher, every school board member, every legislator that you know in the Oregon
Mm-hmm.
state of Oregon gets a copy of this letter and gets a copy of this video. I apologize for the F to bomb. We'll, if need be, we'll edit it out and Bernadette can publish this video separate. I really, really, I just felt it. I just felt it. It's like, are you kidding me?
That's
They were going to
okay.
let
It's
that
all
kid
right.
die. They would literally rather let that child die so that they can get rid of another one of their stinking vaccines. The
Yeah.
jig is up, and they know it, and they're scared, and that's why they made the big mistake that they made. It's a very, very bad tactical error on their part, and I hope that they're shaking in their boots because we're going to bring a storm down on them. Sorry, I did it
Yeah.
again. We're going to bring we're going to bring we're going to bring so many facts, so much science, so much real. They're not going to be able to know what
Yeah.
hit them.
Yeah.
If you're on the Oregon Medical Board, I'm telling you right now, you should be embarrassed. You should be thoroughly embarrassed with what you've attempted to do. And everybody in Oregon, if you know these medical board members, turn your back on them. Don't let them shop in your shop. Kick them out. Don't let them eat in your restaurant. Just if you're their neighbors, let them. Don't talk to them anymore. These are not good people. They're bad actors, and they need to be treated accordingly. There are sociological tools that we have at our disposal to send the message to them that they're not wanted in Oregon. Go ahead, let them know. Their names are available. I'm not going to publish them, but let them know that they are persona non gratis in the state of Oregon. That's our one of
I
our tactics, and
yeah.
don't let up. Let
I
them know.
publish their names. I put it on the in the open letter. Their
Oh, yeah,
names
if their
are
names are
there. So
available, I'm just not going to do it.
yeah,
Go ahead and look at the letter.
yeah,
The
yeah.
point is, I'm sorry if you're a family member of one of these people. I'm sorry if they're your doctors. I'm sorry if you revere them. The point is, there's so much more information coming about these egregious charges. This was just one of the cases. They're trading the volume of pharmaceutical product delivered for the health outcome. As one of the
Mhm.
scientists that looked at the data and brought the data forward, the vaccinated kids in that practice appear to be, by our analysis, less healthy, and the unvaccinated kids appear to be much healthier. And so we answered their questions, and they can't tolerate the truth. And so they're going to try to kill Paul's career. Well, like I said, the game on. We're ready to go.
Game
So
on. Yeah.
we're fully engaged,
Uh,
Bernadette. Thank you for your attendance to this details and bringing the article forward. I'm going to give you a moment
you're
to
welcome.
close out with some words of inspiration.
Well, I just want to tell your viewers that at the bottom of that page, in little green print there's a print, a PDF, and an email function that you could use if you want to send that. PDF does a pretty good job of making it, keeping the formatting with a nice picture if you want to email somebody the PDF of this article or however you want to share it. But do share it everywhere. Send it to every pediatrician you can think of. I know the Oregon legislative session is just beginning. So, bring a copy. Well, it'll probably be a Zoom meeting, but you can still send it to the legislator that you're meeting with. Let's just get the word out there because we really have got to support the ability of doctors to individualize medicine and to respect informed consent. This is important for all of us.
I agree. Thank you so much, Bernadette, and
You're welcome. Thank you, Jack.
enjoy the rest of your evening, my dear. We'll talk with you soon, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.